The Inter-Party Advisory Council IPAC is asking for a thorough review of the 2023 elections, asking for ways to get the process better. Tonight, we dissect what it needs to be done for the post-mortem. Tonight, we'll also be having an exclusive conversation with the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Professor Kingsley Marlow. There are warning signals ahead of Bola Tinubu's administration, which will kick off on 29th of May this year. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimbaloye in Abuja. So much that we need to dig into, especially concerning what IPAC is planning and thinking about the 2023 election. A lot of promises made. There are several failures. Performances of INEC has come under scrutiny. Did INEC deliver based on what they said they will do? And considering the outcome of that election, is it acceptable by stakeholders? Don't forget, there were a lot of meetings held with INEC before that election, where those considerations, did they come to bear in the outcome of that election? These are some of the issues that we need to dissect and talk about tonight. So stay around with me. And the controversies in respect of the fuel subsidy and the proposed $800 million to be taken as a loan from the World Bank by the federal government gets our attention. Are these warning signals that Bola Tinubu and incoming administration should be weary of? Professor Kingsley Marlow, a former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, will be giving us insight tonight on the program. So stay around with me, everyone. First and foremost, let's serve you with some of your political roundup stories.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, the President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the All Progressives Congress have opposed the request of the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Atiku Abubakar, for the live coverage of his petition challenging the declaration of Tinubu as winner of the presidential election. In their separate objections, they insist that the solemn nature of the court will be put in jeopardy if granted, and the courtroom is for serious business and not a stadium or circus ground. The presidential inauguration on May 29 is sacrosanct, despite the litigation at the tribunal courts. This is according to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Chairman, Presidential Transition Council, Mr. Boss Mustafa. Mr. Mustafa said this at the unveiling of the program of events for the presidential inauguration. He says all necessary arrangements by the council and its subcommittees have been made to ensure a smooth and peaceful inauguration ceremony. The unveiling ceremony was attended by members of the Presidential Council, permanent secretaries of some ministries who double as subcommittee members, the media, and other invited guests.
With or without litigation, as long as the law tarries, there will be an inauguration on the 29th. The Electoral Act in itself, as a matter of fact, envisages that a litigant can be between the tribunal and the appellate court.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, says he's throwing his weight behind Honorable Tajuddin Abbas for the Speaker of the 10th House of Representatives to build on legislative gains of the Ninth Assembly. Honorable Gbajabiamila, who was speaking to members-elect from a faction known as the Joint Task Team in Abuja last night, said Honorable Abbas possesses the capacity to lead the 10th House and is asking the members-elect to trust him. The Speaker further explained that the speakership position was zoned to the northwest as the highest voting bloc, which contributed the most to the emergence of the APC at the top.
The President-elect decided to go to the northeast. So the least he could do was to compensate them with the speakership in terms of what they bring to the table. It's as simple as that.
Ahead of the proclamation of the 10th National Assembly, the Center for Grassroots Development and Crime Prevention, a civil society group, is calling on the leadership of the All Progressives Congress to allow the members of the National Assembly choose who will be their leader instead of the current zoning arrangement. Addressing a news conference in Abuja, the convener of the center, Professor Dosu Malomo, says the current and incoming administration should show the world that it will promote devolution devolution of power by promoting independence of the various arms of government. And Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike has commissioned 2 road projects to begin the activities leading to the inauguration of a new governor in the state. The events are part of a week-long set of activities formally announced by the Inauguration Publicity Committee earlier today. Governor Wike during the event boasted of his achievements in the state, saying he will be retiring as a governor with a sense of pride and fulfillment.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's tell you that the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, has said that there is an ongoing investigation on Governor of Zamfara State, Mr. Bello Matawalle. He says there is an alleged 70 billion naira fraud investigation on the governor. The commission, in a statement today, says that the APC Power Brook is being investigated over allegation of monumental corruption and award of phantom contracts and diversion of over 70 billion. It was at a press conference today in Abuja by the head of public affairs.
As part of the extensive investigation of contracts award by the Matawalle administration, especially for phantom projects in the local government areas, the commission has recovered a sum of 300 million naira from a company, Fezel Nigeria Limited. The funds were traced to Zamfara Investment Company. The EFCC investigation is a source of anxiety in government house Gusau, with the governor in mortal dread of his fate once he steps down as governor on May 29, 2023.
As the head of public affairs at the EFCC. Let's now get into a major conversation for tonight, which is about the 2023 general election and what the Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC, has said. IPAC, in its meeting in Abuja, said that there is a need for a thorough review, a post-mortem of that election, and to look into details of what really happened and what went under. And they are asking that these thorough review of the process need to be done to allow all stakeholders know what really happened and how to correct them. And this will not be in prejudice of the tribunal that is ongoing.
The council is reconstituting the Alternative Dispute Resolution Committee, which is ADRC, in line with the provisions of the IPAC Code of Conduct. This is to enable the political class to employ necessary in-house mechanisms to solve issues of disagreement amicably using political solutions. This will not only enhance the stability of the polity, but checkmate the onslaught of misguided politicians who are destabilizing the polity for their narrow, selfish interest. Also, ADRC will, among other things, reduce or eliminate the high cost of litigation and enmity amongst the political class.
That is the national chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, Alhaji Yabaji Sani. Let's get some perspective into it. If you were one of those who expected a lot from INEC, based on the promises INEC made, perhaps you need to understand tonight the perspectives that my guests are going to bring to bear on what really happened, the need for a post-mortem. There is a case in court where petitions INEC is facing, and those who won the election, they are facing those challenges in the courtroom. But again, there is a need to, if there are stakeholders who, before the election, sat together and devised the means to conduct the election, if had anything that went wrong, shouldn't there be any kind of review of the process? And that's the reason why we're going to be having this conversation for future election purposes. I'm being joined by the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, a lawyer, right activist, and election observer, Mr. Samson Itodo. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Good evening.
And also, let's get a benefit and knowledge, insight from someone who is who has a lot of institutional understanding of INEC and his workings. Dr. Mustafa Leki, he joins us from the United States. He was a former national commissioner with INEC. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining us tonight, and it's good to see you. Let's begin the conversation. Something, you are one of those who prepared a lot. Perhaps you are one of those who expected a lot based on what INEC promised. Let's begin first and foremost. I mean, you've said a lot about the outcome of this election. How disappointed are you, or what are your views about the outcome of the election? Let's begin from there.
I think our views are highlighted in the report that Yaga Africa released on the elections, and it's to the effect that the 2023 elections were a missed opportunity, and a missed opportunity to consolidate on some of the gains that we recorded in the journey to 2023. The 2023 election is perhaps one of the most meticulously planned general election since 2011. It was an election that was regulated by a new legal framework that provided INEC with the opportunity to deploy technology in the electoral process, but also early funding for the elections. And we could see that it was a legal framework that gave INEC a lot of powers, enormous powers, to manage elections. So if you were looking for, an independent National Electoral Commission vested with powers, to review results declared under duress or results declared in contravention of extant laws, this was the INEC. But if you look through this, and I think it's important as we look at this review, that we need to consider that election is a composite of several activities implemented within a long period of time. So you have pre, during, and post-elections. And then you come down to a few issues. That what are these issues that shaped the election, and how did they contribute either to the success or the failure? Sheung, there were things that worked in this election, and we must celebrate those things that work. There were things that didn't work in this election. We must highlight those, express our disappointment with those, but also demand that certain actions are taken. So if you say, what are those things that worked?
Yeah.
This is the first time in Nigeria's election where INEC is producing the ballot papers and the result sheets locally. In all our elections since 2011, our sensitive materials have always been produced outside Nigeria. And the question is, don't we have, the resources and the capacity to produce those materials? This election showed that we can produce, election materials internally. The reason why this was introduced was to address issues about logistics. But the key question is, what if you produced materials locally, did it translate to early opening of polls on election day? And we can come to that. The second thing that worked was that the beavers that INEC deployed for the 2023 election was being deployed for the first time in a national election. And so when it came to accreditation was largely successful, because based on our data at Yaga Africa, the beavers recorded about 97 to 98%, performance rate when it came to accreditation. So accreditation, succeeded. I think the other thing that worked was the enthusiasm, the youth power that we saw demonstrated in the course of the elections, that a lot of young people were interested in getting involved in the process. We also saw citizens' resilience and resistance to all forms of malpractices. Now, what didn't work? And I think this is where we pay a lot of attention. The first thing that didn't work was that despite the reforms that INEC introduced, despite local production of sensitive materials, polling units opened late. And so there were logistical issues that impeded on INEC's ability to open polling units early. And you can look across board, and Yaga Africa has shared this data. And the fundamental question is, how come in an election where materials were produced locally, materials were at the state 1 week to the election, how come on the day of the election, in some states, the materials were not deployed to the polling units early? And so it tells you that somewhere, somehow, there was an attempt, and perhaps even successful attempt, to delay opening of polls in some areas across the country.
It looks deliberate, right?
It's deliberate. It's deliberate. And why do we say it's deliberate? INEC took remedial actions. It suspended the resident electoral commissioner for Sokoto. It suspended the resident electoral commissioner for Abia. So across board, you would see, and if you dig deeper, you discover that in some cases, the RECs and some of the EOs went on rampage, undermining the process, making it difficult.
So manipulation of non-compliance with electoral guidance,
and then
manipulation
manipulation of election results was also one thing that went wrong. Because one, if you look at Rivers, and Yaga Africa was the first, to detect the falsification and the manipulation of results in Rivers and in Imo via the PVT. And we said that in Rivers, that the returning officers and the collation officer had mutilated the results. We said the same thing for Imo just right after INEC declared the results. The other issue was around electoral technology. And in this particular case was IREV, that INEC failed, to deliver on its promise of the electronic transmission.
As a lack of transparency.
And that's a lack of transparency. And tied to that is also the poor communication, on the part of INEC to explain to Nigerians what exactly happened. So these are some of the things that went wrong.
There's still a lot of things, part of what you have identified at Yaga, the lessons and the need for the review. Let me bring in Dr. Lekki. There is this independent review that Yaga has done, and now IPAC, this is a conglomeration of political parties, the umbrella body of political parties, saying that there is a need for a post-mortem. It does look to me that since the election finished, INEC has suddenly got mute and just got quiet and silent, radio silent, and we're not hearing anything from INEC. From your own understanding of how things work, are there usually a post-mortem, a review of the process, and usually when does this happen?
Thank you, Sharon, for having me on. I'm glad to be part of this discourse. I see my friend Todo. Yes, INEC usually will produce what is called an election project plan, an EPP document. That EPP document lays out the architecture of a forthcoming election, including the budget, the deliverables, what is going to happen, who's responsible, and duties are assigned. And so that is the basis for going back to do a comprehensive monitoring, appraisal of what really happened. And so I expect that this will happen. This election took place in February, March. We are now in, we are still in May, going on, to June. So I don't think it is necessarily delayed that this has not happened. There was no need for IPAC, Mr. Sani, to be asking for it now. It's going to happen. It's a matter of routine that INEC will do that. I remember when I was in INEC, I was actually chairman of that planning process for the comprehensive review. The review will take place at different levels of INEC operation, involve multi-stakeholders, the participation, including collation officers, returning officers. They will all be called to speak to issues of opportunities and strengths and challenges that took place during the election. And usually, such a report will be the basis for INEC making new proposal for the review of the Electoral Act, which, particularly in this case of the Electoral Act 2022, which happened, benefited tremendously for such a review. So the review will come. INEC is not going to run away from it. The time scale, I'm not too sure that it's too late. It's getting too late for us to do that kind of a review.
If you were still in INEC and you are still chairing that committee, based on what happened in the 2023 election, what do you think would be very pertinent for you to look into?
So a lot of things are pertinent. This election was one of a kind in the sense that there was so much expectation, and INEC itself has gotten a very robust legal framework to be able to do much more than happened, that happened both in the past and happened currently in terms. So I think the issue really for me is INEC not able to rise to the challenge, of the opportunity that are presented by the Electoral Act, and also over-promising beyond what it can actually deliver. I think statements were made that should not have been made in terms of rising the expectations of Nigeria legitimately, for that matter. So that will be an issue of how to make sure you manage those kind of expectations, going forward. There was no need to make statements about this is going to happen when I don't have complete control. of some of the variables that are going to challenge those kinds of expectations. And the issue of, I'll also look at this issue of logistics. Logistics is INEC's biggest problem. And it's good to know that the ballot papers and those kinds of materials are now produced, internally, which is a good thing. But logistics, the biggest factor in logistics is transportation. And INEC has no good control. I don't see when they're going to have a good control. So it's going to be a challenge going forward, because transportation is dependent on people who are providing you with transport services. All these, people owns various union transportation and stuff like that. They are usually, also key players in the election. They also look for elbow room. INEC will contract them. They also go behind INEC and make contract arrangement with other opposing parties. I have a clear example. We've paid, and I remember in Bayelsa, transport unions were paid money to bring boats to the beachhead, and they didn't show up after they've collected money. I want to dismiss all the NYC to go back, and because we couldn't go into Southern Niger, that it was getting very late. So people are working against the transportation issue. So I don't know how INEC can address that. You sign a contract, you are paid money in advance, you are given the time to show up, and you don't show up. And there is no recourse for that. That's a major issue.
Mr. Lekki, let me put you right on the spot. You are one of the most senior officers in INEC, very senior, you're very close in rank to the INEC chairman when you were in office. But something fundamental was wrong with the IREF, which it was obvious to everyone. If you were in the shoes of the INEC chairman, before now or by now, shouldn't Nigerians be hearing of some fundamental administrative discipline or disciplinary measure on what went wrong if a country is spending up to 305 billion or more on an election? On an election day, there was a fundamental failure in the discharge of the promises made. What do you think should be happening in INEC? Because obviously it's not happening.
Well, with regards to the issue of IREF, I think IREF is one of those important opportunities that INEC was able to harvest, from the new Electoral Act 2022. But INEC, unfortunately, failed to rise to the expectation of the promises that they made with regards to IREF. And what we need to do is not to be necessarily emotional and wanting to go to the guillotine and chop somebody's head. What we need to do is to carefully review what happened. I think INEC failed in not communicating and still not communicating. Perhaps they are working on it, but it's taking too long. This is where the issue of perception is very important to sustain people's interest and support, going forward. What really happened? All those promises that this is going to be even though it is not backed up by, it's not a requirement by the legal framework that INEC must transmit the result live, and so on, and that it must be done, and it's not a part of the collation or declaration process. It's not there stated in black and white in the law. But still, this is a promise that was made and which gave a lot of enthusiasm to the youth and many others to have confidence in the process and came out to vote. And now, the process has not been explained. There's severe lack of communication. What really happened? That should be immediately, investigated, and INEC should come through completely and say exactly what happened. That's a matter that is still hanging, that needs to be dealt with, even though it is not a requirement of law. But it has to do with terms of perception and people's key in to want to go forward with any future election and even some remaining elections, including those who are coming, the off-season elections at the gubernatorial and state level. So INEC should be doing that. I'm not sure they are not doing that, but they shouldn't be silent about it. This is where the communication is an issue. You need to come up and say exactly what is the laid out procedure. We are going to investigate this and make people know that this was clearly beyond. I don't want to put words or solutions into their minds or heads. What is clearly beyond what you could have done. We need to know what happened, why those promises were not kept, even though there was no law broken in not meeting those particular objectives.
I mean, it does look to me like the case of a failed promise of marriage, because, I mean, a lot of people, and you know how it is when you promise someone marriage and you fail in it. I mean, that's how heartbroken some Nigerians were. I mean, some people will say, like Samson said, there were some successes. But let me come back to Samson just for a moment. Samson, you talked about the things that went wrong. But you have also highlighted at Yaga Africa the big lessons. You have also highlighted the need for a review for this process? What are the big lessons for us?
I think the first big lesson from this election is that reforms, if properly implemented, can deliver credible elections. And what's the case in point? It's this electronic accreditation. You know, if you look at previous elections, there are some states that are notorious for padding turnout figures. But with the introduction of the BVAS, it made it difficult, you know, for padding of votes as well as turnout for elections. So that's one, because the BVAS did deliver when it came to accreditation. It's just that on electronic transmission of results, there were failures, and those failures really hurt the integrity of the process. The second, you know, big lesson from this election is that technology is not a silver bullet, that we need modern technology to deliver transparent elections. You can have the best of technology. If the humans who are managing this technology are compromised, if they are complicit, then technology will not deliver. The third sort of big lesson is that this waste culture that we have within our governance and electoral system needs to stop. When majority of voters didn't show up to cast their vote, we wasted, as a country, we wasted over 200 million ballot papers. And if you put that together, that's billions of naira that have actually gone to waste. And so this is an election, you know, where the level of turnout was way, way low. And we're currently interrogating what was responsible for this, that despite the reforms, despite the enthusiasm, you still recorded this low turnout of voters. But then I think it's also important on the issue about electoral technology and looking at issues that need to be reviewed, that one, INEC needs to explain to Nigerians, why is it that currently on the IREV, over 9,000 result sheets are yet to be uploaded on the IREV for the presidential elections. Up till now, INEC needs to communicate. And you know, Sheun Channels and Yaiga Africa work on the IREV with the IRAD. And we know that in all the elections where IREV has been deployed, we've never recorded 100% uploads of results, because there are places where there are cancellation or where there are no results. But INEC explains. But in this particular instance, INEC is yet to communicate to Nigerians. So I think it's important that part of this review process is beyond the failure or the technological glitch, who is responsible, Nigerians need to know. But Nigerians also need to know what's delaying the upload of the 9,000 results.
Because I need to get Dr. Lekki back so that he can give us his closing thought. You highlighted top 15 issues. If you can go through it in just about 60 seconds or less, these top 15 issues for election review of the 2023 election.
Like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about election, it's a composite of several activities and processes. And for us, these are the 15 issues we think that should be a subject of review.
Without having to dig around, these issues are already there.
So you need to look at the environment, because the election was conducted amidst insecurity, fuel scarcity, as well as the currency redesign. How did that affect the election? You need to look at the legal framework. We also need to look at the voters register, the PVC collection. We need to look at electoral technology, review how the IREV and Beavers is really central to this election.
I'm of the opinion that we should reduce human contact in our election.
Absolutely. But we also need to look at election logistics management, which we've highlighted, the behavior and action of election officials, because collation officers and returning officers did undermine this election, some of them. You need to look at voter turnout, INEC communication, resource management, voter suppression, the role of the judiciary, you know, political parties and candidates, as well as the media, as well as election support from development partners and election observation. These are 15 issues we feel should be on the front burner of the review.
I think you guys are spot on from some of the issues that you have raised. Let me allow Dr. Lekki to send us out of this issue with your closing thought. Going forward, election is is not a kid game right here in our country, and it's a developing democracy that we have on our hands. For you, what is the way forward? Proffering solutions, what should INEC be doing? Because INEC is at the center of it all.
I agree with Samson on those 15, and perhaps there are even more. And I also want to say that these 15 points that he had mentioned are not really new. I mean, if you go back, you have the same issue of low turnout, you have the same issue of logistics, you have the same issue of people being compromised. These are there, and I think we need to go back again and see what can be done to toughen the Electoral Act. And I also believe that we need to be doing something in terms of ensuring that people actually participate in election. There are a number of countries, and INEC has taken study tour to a number of countries, including Brazil, for example, where it is mandatory that citizens must vote, and they have over 90% turnout. We need to be looking in those directions. You can't expect the country to do well, and yet you don't participate in the process, and you don't come out to vote. It's so much money that is wasted on ballot paper. These papers, ballot paper, they spend billions of naira to produce it, and they're also shredded. And even the shredding of the ballot papers are supervised, and they cost money to shred the papers. Have not been used, they have to still pay again to have them shredded. So there's a lot of issues there that needs to be, looked into. And I think INEC needs to be more communicative. INEC can be very silent. I don't know whether it is an ego issue or whatever. I need to own up and be prompt in communicating to Nigerians about what happened.
The communication has been a total disaster when it comes to how INEC dealt with the 2023 elections. I mean, I'm not sure anybody who is handling over 300 billion worth of business will have such a very terrible and disastrous communication strategy.
Absolutely. I think we need to, and it's still ongoing, we need to come out and do. That's why it's very important that this review is done, and so that it can let Nigerians know. There should be a communication strategy also, and a dissemination of the findings of the review, and once it is completed. Thank you very much.
Dr. Musa Valeki, a former INEC National Commissioner, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, because this is very important for building not only our society, but our democracy. Something. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it's important for the public to know that yesterday, INEC inaugurated, an election review committee. So INEC has inaugurated an election review committee, including a second committee on report writing. So officially, INEC has commenced its own internal process of reviewing
which they need the public to be carried along.
So this is
one of the bad communication process.
So we wait for INEC and the committee to unveil what's the scope and the methodology, as well as how the strategy for public engagement, because the public needs to be part of this entire review process.
Thank you so much indeed. Let's go and break, everyone, and when we come back, we might be focusing on the economy and what needs to be done by the incoming government. The Buhari government is already on its way out. But if the $800 million US gets into the hands of the government, and they're going to be sharing 5,000 naira or 7,000 naira to about, say, 10 million Nigerians, what does this amount to? What is the effect on inflation in Nigeria? Does it really make sense? We're going to make sense of all of these issues for you and what the Tinubu government should be looking out for. Stay with me, everyone. Those are Kingsley Munga will be joining us later. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. As soon as the Senate President announced on the floor of the Senate the request letter from the President Muhammadu Buhari for the approval of an $800 million loan facility from the World Bank, Nigerians were speaking about it. There were loads and loads of reactions. The same letter was read on the floor of the House of Representatives. But the Minister of Finance has been reacting to this. She's saying that the story that there is a new request of the $800 million is not new. It says this is the same loan that the Honorable Minister had explained on several occasions, that the $800 million facility the country recently got from the World Bank for post-petrol subsidy removal palliative was awaiting parliamentary approval for the federal government to commence disbursement. What does this sound right morally, financially, economically, and governance-wise for Nigeria to be seeking this depth of facility, considering the already neck-breaking debt burden that the nation is facing? These are some crucial questions. And there are those who have said this will even worsen the already bad situation that the Bola Tinubu government will be inheriting. Well, let's get some perspectives and some benefit of knowledge and insight from a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, a lawyer and political economist, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. He joins us live from the United States. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. Let's shoot straight. Prof, How do you receive the news of, or how did you receive it, the news of Nigeria requesting, well, the minister has said it is not new. It has already even, in fact, gotten a nod from the World Bank to get an $800 million US loan. If you were Bola Tinubu, for example, or Muhammadu Buhari, would you be seeking a loan considering the debt burden that Nigeria currently is having on its hands?
Well, I am on record. I'm one of those Nigerians, and there are many of us, I suspect, who believe that Nigeria is borrowing too much and generating too little in revenue to pay back those loans. And so, we're borrowing for a lot of wrong reasons. I don't think it's right to borrow money to pay palliatives because that is not a sustainable approach to the matter of subsidy removal. But since it's not a new loan, according to the Ministry of Finance, and it seems that they had already reached that agreement, I think it's more appropriately, given how late it is in the day for the outgoing administration, I think it is more appropriate to allow the new administration to make its own decisions as to how it wishes to go about these obligations, in terms of subsidy removal, whether or not there will be palliatives to cushion its effects and things like that. I think it's too late in the day to be drawing down that loan at this time. It's just very late. There will be a handover in the next 10 days or so. So what's the point? Let the incoming administration look at it and decide how it wants to proceed.
So there are those, there are concerns though, some of the facts which raises concern include the manner in which these monies will be utilized. And there are those who are asking that the World Bank should reject that offer or that request from Nigeria. And Prof, let me give you an understanding of perhaps how this money is supposed to be disbursed. It's supposed to be disbursed to about 50 million vulnerable Nigerians or 10 million households as part of its fuel subsidy palliatives. It's supposed to be a cash transfer scheme to poor and vulnerable people in both rural and urban areas, and is supposed to have been given to spent on good works, non-consulting services. 10.74 million of the 23.3 million is supposed to be part of a consultancy of this total sum. If you look at those breakdown, do you see any untoward undertone there?
Well, it's not about undertones, really. I think it's more about what's the record in terms of social safety net administration in Nigeria. There are lots of good intentions, but the record is not very encouraging. There is also evidence that there has been a lot of fraud in many of these schemes. And so I think we should say, let what buzzed last night be a mosquito. Whatever it was that buzzed, but let's just call it a mosquito and move on into the incoming administration and let them take their decisions and take their responsibility for it. That's what I would say. I think, the matter of consultants or this or that, the whole matter of poverty in Nigeria and social safety net administration needs a comprehensive, redesign. I don't think it's robust enough. The intentions are good, but the administration of it so far has not had any real impact on the lives of Nigerians and poverty levels and things like that. So we need to redesign the whole thing to make it sustainable. Can you sustain it by borrowing? What country borrows to make social safety net payments? It's an oxymoron. You have to generate revenues. The new administration that is coming in has to think about how to generate revenue. It might want to think about how to generate quick revenues, how to generate mid-term revenues, and how to generate longer-term revenues. These are three different approaches. I think that if the new administration wants to do anything when it comes to social safety net administration or in terms of removing the subsidy. And first of all, where should the response to the subsidy removal come from? The focus should be on transportation. That's where the money should be invested, because the first place that there will be an inflationary price hit will be in the cost of transport. And that's where we need to go and think very deeply about how to create a transportation system that is subsidized, no doubt about it, but with a fraction of the amount of money we are using currently in paying subsidies, 5 trillion or something to that effect. With 500 billion or less, you can have an effective subsidized transportation program for millions of Nigerians.
Yeah. So Bola Tinubu has made it clear. He says if he becomes president, that subsidy must go. He says he's anti-people. He said this in January this year. He's made it clear,
correct.
Except if he's going to change his mind if he assumes office. And Prof, if you have about a projected 44 trillion naira public debt, are you telling Bola Tinubu to say, do not take the 800 million US dollar loan?
Listen, you don't have a 44 trillion naira debt. Did you say naira or dollars?
That's what the DMO, yeah. That's what the DMO is projecting.
The incoming government will inherit a 77 trillion naira debt. That's what is looking at the incoming administration. So, that's why I would say, whether or not it will go ahead with the 800 million World Bank, let that administration make that decision. It's too late in the day, I think, for the outgoing administration to be taking on liabilities for the incoming government and for Nigeria.
So, but for those who think that is a political risk because of the shock effect of free subsidy, but Tinubu said, I will let it go. For you,
listen.
There are those who also think that on the very first day of his assumption of office on the 29th May, it should be one of the statements in his inaugural speech to say subsidy ends today. Do you agree?
Listen, let me explain. We have had a battle for the past 50 years between economic rational thinking and political and economic superstition. Subsidy is based on a superstition that it helps the poor. It doesn't. It distorts the fuel supply chain in Nigeria. Paying that subsidy is directly increasing Nigeria's deficits, fiscal deficits. Every year, Nigeria is spending far more money than it is raising because it is committed to paying a subsidy that benefits far more the wealthy people and their SUVs than the poor people, many of whom are carless. Subsidy is based on a fraud. The numbers of cars and the consumption of petrol in Nigeria, we all know, is highly inflated because there is a subsidy cabal. And they work in cahoots with some people in the public sector. So this is a drain on Nigeria's resources. It's a drain pipe. It's wasteful. It's not efficient. And it is just making the government broke every year. And every year, a government that is broke continues to borrow more, presumably to make itself less broke. But that doesn't happen. It's making itself more. So subsidy has to go. The question is, and it's for the new government, you have to have the political will. But you also, I personally believe, have to educate Nigerians about why the subsidy has to go. Because many Nigerians, one, they do not trust the government. Because of the humongous amounts of corruption that we have seen in the public sector in Nigeria, many Nigerians believe that the only thing they benefit from government is cheap petrol. So you see, that's where the superstition comes. But they don't understand that this is one of the reasons we have huge, fuel scarcities in our country, because people import these things, it's subsidized, then they go and sell it across the border to our neighbors in West Africa, where petrol is not cheap. So they make a lot more money by doing that, and that means the petrol is not available for Nigerians.
Yeah, Prof.
So that's the point.
I mean, I probably just, there is a connection though from what you're saying and an area that you know so too well, and that is the monetary policy. I mean, if someone like Femi Falana had come out to say there is a bad situation where the Nigerian economy has been dollarized, that paying for commodity in dollar in a naira economy, it's an anomaly. And I'd like to know what your views. I mean, in fact, he was clamoring that Nigeria should join the BRICS. What are your views on that?
Well, of course, many people believe that Nigeria, if it were to be operating at its rightful level, should be part of the BRICS countries. So maybe you might then call it the BRICS. But we're not at that level. That's just the fact of the matter. The BRICS, there's been a report about the BRICS having some sort of currency union, and that's not true. These countries are very diverse. They cannot use one currency. The dollar is the major international currency of transactions. And because we lack foreign exchange, inflows, and there's foreign exchange scarcity in our country, a lot of things have become dollarized. But if we reconstruct our economy such that inflows of foreign currency into the country become quite significant, such that Nigeria becomes a productive economy and exports goods, there will not be this problem of dollarization, because the naira will find its proper level. And the more the market determines the allocation of resources, the more the price levels become realistic. Listen, when NITEL was scrapped and the whole question of SIM cards and telecommunications were privatized, initially it was all very costly. To buy a SIM card could cost you as much as 30,000 naira. Today, you can get a SIM card for almost free. This is what happens when you use market mechanisms. Nigeria has a very weak administrative state at this time. And so we need to allow the market to allocate resources while we rebuild state capacity. Now, subsidy in itself is not a crime, but we should subsidize production, not subsidizing consumption. What we're doing with the petrol subsidy is to subsidize consumption, so that's not a productive subsidy. It doesn't contribute anything to the economy. So this is why I believe, and I believe the incoming administration has made it clear that they intend to remove subsidy. So, and I think that's a good policy direction. The point is, what do you invest in to cushion the effects of the subsidy? And you should educate people as to why the subsidy has to be removed. No government has had the political will to do this, and no government has gone ahead to actually educate Nigerians on the economics of subsidy removal. This must happen in the next dispensation, because the time to bite the bullet is here. We can no longer, we can run, but we cannot hide. And I think we've come to that stage.
No longer. In fact, there was an expert who was saying to me that it's a very horrific moment to lead a country as Nigeria because of the challenges. I mean, not a good time to be a leader in any of the states, not even at the center, because of the enormous burden of leading this country. Any little slip and economy will be on his knees. That's how fragile things are looking right now. But, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who voted, along different party lines, at this point, when the elections are over, they probably will be bothered not about the voting, but about the food on their table and the monies in their pocket. The question is, how will the incoming government be able to cope and lead this country in such a way that revenue that this present government says is a problem to us will become something of the past? What do you suggest should be done urgently because there are those who believe that there are needs for urgent attention and urgent policy decision to be made by the incoming government as fast as the second day of assumption of office. Do you think so?
Yes, I think so. What the incoming government does within the first month, within the first 2 months, and within the first 3 months is what will determine how it goes as a government and how the country goes. So there's need for confidence building. There's need to rally Nigerians around. There's need to plug the loopholes of waste and corruption that we all know suffuse the architecture of governance in Nigeria. There is need to focus on revenue generation, not more and more borrowing. No, that's not the right way to go. You can never borrow your way out of the kind of crisis Nigeria finds itself today. You know, the secret of holes is that when you should know when you're in a hole to stop digging and to begin to look for your way out of the hole. Continuing to borrow in huge amounts is to keep digging ourselves into a hole. So, what should the government do? I believe, just my own personal view, the government needs breathing space for the short term. And that breathing space should focus on two things. One, investing in what will cushion the effect of subsidy removal. Two, something that is focused on youth and unemployment in Nigeria. These are the two major things that they should do. Stop borrowing. Find some resources. If it means some asset sales that can give Nigeria maybe 10 trillion naira or so, you know, for the first 6 months to 9 months, so that the government can have space to do one or two things that can generate confidence and plan for the sustainability of those policies. This is what I would focus on, generating the confidence of investors with its policy direction and the kind of appointments it makes to important public sectors, especially the economy and security. These are the two things that will determine whether confidence will return. Inclusive appointments of competent Nigerians, security measures to improve the security environment, and you know, the actual policies that will begin to generate confidence. There's too much of a role for the state, and that creates a lot of inefficiencies. It creates arbitrage. It creates a lot of opportunities for corruption. The foreign exchange problems need to be tackled by the central bank, you know, and I believe that, you know, all the multiple exchange rates should be unified, and that Nigeria should let go of government control of the foreign exchange rate. It's hurting the economy. It's not helping it.
Prof, thank you so much indeed. These are very deep insight that you have given us tonight as a people, as a nation, and the incoming government. I'm very sure they are listening tonight and they have taken their own notes. And perhaps my own, although I'm not an economist, but I am a very, very strong believer in the fact that federating units need to rise up and play their own roles. Federal government is not the only element in the governance structure in this country. Governors cannot be lazy. They need to rise up and do the hard work too.
I totally agree, but that tasks the incoming government on the matter of constitutional restructuring back to a proper federalism. It's one of the things that will also determine whether the government succeeds or not. If the government caves into vested interests and refuses to devolve more and more powers, then they're not doing the right thing. You know, but you need to carry people along. You need to make the case for why restructuring favors every part of Nigeria. And the economic case for restructuring is completely unassailable. It is watertight.
Thank you so much. Kingsley Mahalu, the former deputy governor of the central bank, a lawyer, an economist, and a former presidential candidate. Thanks so much indeed for your thoughts tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much indeed. That's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm sure Kimale. I'll see you tomorrow again at 7 p.m. God bless Nigeria.